Change is always happening in Formula One, but to avoid another dominance from 2026 onwards, instead of change, nothing is happening for the upcoming years, as the FIA is slamming down on any development for the new regulations by imposing a development ban on the teams until 2025. So, what does this mean for the teams? And what could they do in the meantime to make sure they're in the lead when the new regulations start? Keep watching to find out. New wind tunnel and CFD limits have been incorporated in the regulations, prohibiting teams from designing the key parts of their 2026 Formula One cars until the beginning of 2025. Following the F1 Commission's agreement that no work on the development of a car for 2026 may be carried out before January 1st, 2025, the FIA's World Motorsport Council has accepted regulation modifications to enforce that. As expected, this is accomplished by imposing restrictions on restricted wind tunnel testing and CFD simulations. Essentially the same restrictions imposed on the current generation of cars when the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted the plan for new rules in 2021, and efforts were made to manage costs for the 12-month delay to the implementation of the new rules in 2022. From December 1st this year until January 1st, 2025, the only wind tunnel work authorized is the use of a scale model that substantially complied with the 2023, 2024, or 2025 technical regulations. Dyno testing to develop braking system components with minimal air ducting is permitted as long as it does not test or in any way provide incidental data or knowledge on bodywork, performance, or endurances. It's a similar tale when it comes to prohibiting CFD simulations, with the same timeframe of December 1st, 2023 to January 1st, 2025, only allowing CFD work with geometries that substantially comply with the 2021 to 25 technical regulations. The sole purpose of the development of the brake system components and associated test rigs is the only exception. Because the prohibition went into force on December 1st of this year, any work done before to that day was allowed, albeit any work done prior to that date will be exceedingly preliminary due to the lack of established chassis rules. So far, all that is known publicly is that the cars will be shorter and lighter with reworked aerodynamics, less downforce and drag, and another attempt to improve wake characteristics, though some would prefer a greater focus on how cars can produce downforce in dirty air rather than trying to control the wake itself. The absence of a set of published technical requirements, however, would not necessarily prevent teams from working on their cars now or next year if the ban were not in place. There may be draft versions in private circulation, which is why the restrictions specifically prohibit working on cars that are described by published technical regulations. The regulations prohibit using car geometry that is partially or wholly compliant with and/or substantially derived from drafts and/or published versions of the 2026 F1 Technical Regulations or FIA proposed 2026, bodywork geometries and concepts for wind tunnel or CFD testing. However, team working groups will have already been formed and will be looking ahead to 2026, and these may continue as long as nothing makes it to the wind tunnel or CFD phase. Although this does not go as far as what Lewis Hamilton proposed earlier this year, namely not allowing teams to develop next year's car until a certain point in the season preceding it, it is a reasonable measure that means teams can only commit meaningful development resources to their 2026 cars for the 12 months preceding that year. It implies that all wind tunnel and CFD work, in terms of cost and time invested, will be fully reflected into teams' 2025 budget cap and aerodynamic testing restrictions, preventing anybody from gaining an advantage by sacrificing their 2024 seasons and/or 2025 cars. This may have been enticing. After all, it is similar to what Haas and Sauber did ahead of 2022, since early research ahead of a new set of regulations can provide a team a significant edge. That will still be an issue, and these constraints put all of the emphasis on selecting when to stop development in 2025 in order to devote all of one's time and money to the 2026 car. But, luckily for the teams, given the magnitude of the technological project, the constraints for power unit development are not as severe, and nothing significant has changed from what has been spelled out for some time. Although the V6 turbo hybrid engines will be preserved after a long run for the first generation models debuted in 2014, there will be major alterations. The MGU-H has been phased out until 2026, But electrical power production is growing dramatically due to a greatly upgraded MGU-K and battery, bringing the proportion between internal combustion engine and electrical power near to 50-50. The 6 registered power unit manufacturers, Red Bull Powertrains, Mercedes, Ferrari, Honda, Alpine, and Audi, have been granted permission to work on the 2026 engines without limitations, and no ban, such as that imposed on aerodynamic development, is expected. However, there are constraints on how they are produced, including the equipment that may be used, the amount of time that can be spent using them, and, for the first time, the amount of money that can be spent. 3 single-cylinder dynos, 3 power unit dynos, 1 powertrain dyno, and 1 whole car dyno are available, as well as 2 energy recovery system test benches and 1 energy store battery test bench. The total number of operation hours, defined as when the engine speed on the dyno surpasses 7,500 revolutions per minute, is limited to 5,400 throughout 2023, 2024, and 2025, with a restriction of 2160 hours for each given year within that time period, with the exception of 1 single-cylinder dyno strictly for the development of the fuel and/or oil. Existing or prospective fuel and oil suppliers are not permitted to run a test bench for the purposes of 2026 engine development. There are also budgetary constraints in effect before 2026. Engine manufacturers may spend $95 million every full year reporting period in 2023, 2024, and 2025, with new power unit makers, Audi and Red Bull Powertrains, receiving $10 million in 2023 and 2024 and $5 million more in 2025. The F1 Commission has also considered and approved a number of technical topics. Further testing of the rainy weather package aimed to limit the amount of spray emitted by cars will take place in the spring of next year. This will employ a cover design that completely envelopes the tyre, with the goal of producing a proof of concept for the wheel cover and helping define the project's future direction. An early test of this concept earlier this year yielded mixed results. After a harsh Qatar Grand Prix in which many drivers suffered from heat exhaustion, the FIA began researching at measures to aid driver cooling. It has been decided that a scoop to boost driver cooling would be installed on the car, with more research into supplemental cooling methods for more extreme conditions to follow. Furthermore, a much debated and contentious plan to prohibit tyre blankets has been postponed once more, with a decision reached early to maintain the blankets until 2025, avoiding a new decision in July next year. And finally, after receiving approval from teams and stakeholders, Formula One is going to tweak its sprint format for 2024 in order to make race weekends simpler to follow. The governing FIA said that its Sporting Advisory Committee will make a final recommendation to the F1 Commission in January. The Commission gave overall support for an update to the sprint format for 2024 to further rationalise the weekend by separating sprint activities from those for the Grand Prix, the International Automobile Federation, FIA, said in a statement. 6 of the 22 races this year were sprint weekends, including the Qatar Grand Prix when Red Bull's Max Verstappen won his 3rd World Championship on a Saturday. The qualifying shootout could be moved to Friday, with the 100 km race contested on Saturday morning before qualifying for the main Sunday Grand Prix. The current format includes qualifying for the Grand Prix on Friday, followed by sprint qualifying and a standalone race on Saturday. For the sprint race, points might be distributed more broadly, with a possible reverse grid element also being considered. The Sporting Advisory Committee will further work through specific details, particularly regarding timing and parc ferme regulations, for a final proposal to be presented to the F1 Commission for the first meeting of 2024. Following that meeting, any potential changes to the sprint format will be announced. For now, it has been announced that we'll see sprint races in China, Race 5, Miami, Race 6, Austria, Race 11, Austin, Race 19, Brazil, Race 21, and Qatar, Race 23. Are you excited to see the sprint races being held in a different weekend format next year? Do you think it will improve the anticipation for Sunday's race now with the changes, or will it still spoil Sunday's fun? And what about those development bans for 2026? Does it seem fair to you? Let us know what you think in the comments down below.